Once the leather was soft, they used needles made of bird bones and thread made of animal tendons to sew everything into warm, fitted tunics. Before humans built the pyramids, before we invented the wheel, before we even learned to write our own names, we had already discovered how to get out of our own heads. Long before agriculture, before cities, before religion as we know it, our ancestors were already chasing altered states of consciousness. They chewed strange plants that twisted their vision. They drank fruit that had gone wild with fermentation. And in the flickering dark of a cave, thousands of years before anyone could write the word party, they may have already been throwing one. So what did the very first high in human history actually look like? Let's go back, way back, not just decades, not just centuries, but tens of thousands of years, into a world without cities, without agriculture, and without a single written word to describe what people were feeling. It is easy to imagine early humans as purely practical, focused only on hunting animals, gathering food, and staying warm through the night. But the more scientists study the deep past, the more that picture starts to change. Alongside survival, there was curiosity. Alongside hunger, there was the search for something more. And in a world without television, without music streaming, without any form of entertainment we would recognize today, the discovery of a plant or a drink that could shift your entire perception of reality must have felt nothing short of magical. To understand how early humans discovered altered states, we have to remember something important. We did not invent psychoactive plants. We simply found them already growing all around us. Long before the first cities, our hunter-gatherer ancestors were expert botanists out of necessity. Survival meant knowing every plant in the landscape. Which ones fed you, which ones healed you, and which ones could kill you. Somewhere in that constant trial and error, they inevitably stumbled onto a fourth category. Plants that did something else entirely. Plants that changed the way the world looked, sounded, and felt. Take psilocybin mushrooms, for example. These small, unassuming fungi grow naturally in dung-rich grasslands across parts of Africa. Exactly the kind of environment early hominins would have foraged in daily. Some researchers have proposed a controversial but fascinating idea known as the stoned ape hypothesis. The theory suggests that early human ancestors, particularly around 2 million years ago, may have regularly encountered and consumed these mushrooms while foraging near grazing herds. Now, we have to be careful here. This is a hypothesis, not settled science, and many anthropologists remain skeptical of its stronger claims. But the softer version of the idea is far less controversial. It simply states that early humans almost certainly encountered psychoactive fungi on a regular basis, whether or not it reshaped our evolution. Mushrooms were not the only door our ancestors walked through. In North America, evidence points to the ritual use of peyote, a small spineless cactus containing mescaline, going back at least 5,000 to 6,000 years. Dried peyote buttons have been found in rock shelters in Texas, carbon dated to a time long before any written record existed on the continent. In Siberia and parts of northern Europe, ancient peoples turned to a very different substance. The fly agaric mushroom, with its iconic red cap and white spots, the same mushroom you probably picture in fairy tales. Certain Siberian shamanic traditions are believed to have used it for centuries in ritual and healing ceremonies, valuing its intense and unpredictable effects. Then there is the ancient use of the coca leaf in the Andes. Archaeological evidence, including chewed quids of coca leaf found at sites in Peru, suggests humans were chewing coca for its mild stimulant effects at least 8,000 years ago. That is thousands of years before the Inca Empire even existed. And it was not just about escape or euphoria. For many of these ancient communities, the plants were tools. Tools for enduring long hunts. Tools for suppressing hunger and pain. Tools for reaching altered mental states used in healing rituals. The line between medicine, ritual, and recreation simply did not exist the way it does today. It is worth pausing here to think about what kind of knowledge this actually represents. Early humans had no chemistry textbooks, no laboratories, and no way to test a plant's effects except by trying it themselves, often at real personal risk. Some of these early experiments almost certainly ended badly, with sickness, poisoning, or worse, long before anyone understood which plants were safe. The knowledge that survived and got passed down, generation after generation, represents an extraordinary act of collective learning, refined slowly over thousands of years. In many ways, it is one of humanity's earliest and least appreciated scientific achievements, quietly built through trial, danger, and patience long before anyone thought to call it science at all. Which brings us to one of the most debated pieces of evidence in this entire story: rock art. In the Tassili N'Ajjer Mountains of Algeria, ancient paintings dating back roughly 7,000 to 9,000 years depict humanoid figures covered in what look like mushrooms, some researchers argue. The figures appear to have mushroom shapes sprouting from their bodies, and dotted patterns some interpret as representing visionary experiences. Not every archaeologist agrees with this interpretation. Symbols can be misread, and ancient art rarely comes with an instruction manual explaining exactly what it means. But taken together, the mushrooms, the cacti, the coca leaves, and the cave paintings paint a consistent picture. Long before recorded history, humans across completely disconnected corners of the planet were independently discovering the same thing. Certain plants could take you somewhere else. Plants were not the only path to an altered mind. Nature had already invented something else entirely: alcohol. And here is the wild part. Humans may not have even been the first species to discover it. In forests around the world, animals like elephants, monkeys, and even fruit flies have been observed seeking out overripe, fermented fruit lying on the forest floor. As fruit rots, naturally occurring yeasts break down its sugars and produce alcohol as a byproduct. Some scientists call this the drunken monkey hypothesis, the idea that our primate ancestors evolved a taste for the smell and taste of ethanol millions of years ago, simply because it signaled ripe, calorie-rich, easy-to-digest food. In other words, our attraction to alcohol might not be a modern weakness at all. It might be an ancient survival instinct we inherited from creatures who lived in the trees millions of years before humans existed. Fast forward to early humans, and that same instinct did not disappear. If anything, it evolved with us. Archaeological evidence from sites in China suggests that as far back as 9,000 years ago, people were deliberately fermenting a mixture of rice, honey, and fruit into a primitive alcoholic drink. Residue analysis on ancient pottery, using chemical traces left behind in the clay, has allowed archaeologists to detect alcohol production going back even further in some regions. This means our ancestors were not just stumbling onto fermented fruit by accident anymore. At some point, someone figured out you could recreate that process on purpose. Imagine the moment. A container of crushed fruit or grain left out too long. Days later, someone opens it, expecting spoiled food. Instead, they find something strange: a sharp smell, a tingling taste, and a feeling completely unlike anything they had felt before. That accidental discovery, repeated independently in different corners of the world, may be one of the most important culinary breakthroughs in human history. Not just because it gave people a way to feel good, but because fermentation also made food safer. The alcohol content in fermented drinks could kill dangerous bacteria, making them, in some cases, safer to drink than untreated water. So this was not simply about intoxication. It was medicine, nutrition, and preservation, wrapped into a single discovery. And once humans understood the science, even in a crude, instinctive way, they never let it go. Every civilization that followed, from ancient Egypt to Mesopotamia to early China, built rituals, economies, and even religions around fermented drink. But it all started here, with wild fruit, wild yeast, and a moment of accidental genius somewhere in deep prehistory. So let's put all of this together. Picture a group of early humans gathered around a fire as the sun disappears behind the hills. The hunt that day was successful. There is meat roasting, fruit gathered, and somewhere in the group, a container of fermented liquid being passed hand to hand. Someone begins to beat out a rhythm on a hollow log or stretched hide. Others join in, some with their voices, some just swaying with the sound. As the fermented drink takes effect, laughter grows louder. Movements become looser, less self-conscious. In some groups, someone may have chewed on a handful of psychoactive mushrooms or leaves earlier that evening, gathered earlier while foraging. As the effects deepen, the firelight begins to look different. Shadows stretch and pulse against the cave walls. Patterns seem to crawl and shimmer where there were none before. To an observer with modern eyes, this scene might look shockingly familiar. Music, dancing, firelight. A shared substance passed around a circle of people, breaking down the walls between them. Many anthropologists believe these early altered state gatherings were not just about having fun. They likely played a much deeper social role. Shared intoxication may have helped strengthen social bonds within small hunter-gatherer groups, the same groups whose survival depended entirely on cooperation and trust. Some researchers even argue that ritualized altered states, whether from fermented drink or psychoactive plants, played a role in the earliest forms of religious and spiritual belief. The blurred, dreamlike perception created by these substances may have felt like a genuine glimpse into another world, a spirit world, an ancestor world, a world beyond the physical one they knew. For people without written language, without science to explain what was happening in their brains, that experience must have felt incredibly powerful, even sacred. It's a strange thought, isn't it? That somewhere in that fire-lit circle, tens of thousands of years ago, might be one of the earliest roots of both religion and celebration, at the exact same time. Long before temples, long before priests, long before anyone had a word for spirituality. Here's what makes this story even more remarkable. This was not a single discovery that spread outward from one lucky tribe. It happened again and again, in places that had no contact with each other whatsoever. In Australia, Aboriginal communities have used a native plant called paturi for thousands of years, chewing it much like coca leaf for its mild stimulant and appetite-suppressing effects during long journeys across harsh terrain. In parts of East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, the practice of chewing cat leaves for their stimulant properties stretches back so far that its true origins are difficult to pin down with certainty. In Papua New Guinea and across the Pacific Islands, kava root has been prepared as a calming, faintly sedative drink for countless generations, central to social and ceremonial life long before European contact. And in the Amazon rainforest, indigenous peoples developed something even more sophisticated, a brewed combination of specific plants that, on their own, would do almost nothing to the human body, but combined together in exactly the right way, created a powerful altered state now known globally as ayahuasca. Think about what that actually required. Someone, generations ago, had to notice that one plant alone did nothing. Another plant alone did nothing. But mixed together, in the right ratio, something extraordinary happened. That is not an accident. That is careful, patient, generational experimentation, passed down long before anyone could write the recipe on paper. It is a pattern that keeps repeating throughout this entire investigation, no matter which continent or culture we look at. Different continents, different plants, different climates, different cultures, completely different starting points. And yet, over and over, humans arrived at the same basic idea. Somewhere out there, hidden in the natural world around them, waiting quietly in the soil, the bark, and the overripe fruit, was a way to shift the mind. And once they found it, they built rituals, medicine, and community around it. Scientists sometimes call this pattern convergent cultural evolution. The same basic human needs and instincts, showing up as remarkably similar solutions, even in societies with zero contact with one another. It suggests something important. The drive to alter consciousness may not be a cultural quirk unique to one region or one era. It may be something closer to a universal human trait, wired deep into who we are as a species. So why does any of this matter today? Because it completely reshapes the story we tell ourselves about human history. We tend to imagine our ancestors as purely practical creatures, focused only on hunting, surviving, and reproducing. But the evidence suggests something more complicated, and honestly, more human. Even in the harshest conditions imaginable, without agriculture, without permanent shelter, without any guarantee of tomorrow, our ancestors still carved out space for altered experience, for connection, for something beyond mere survival. They were not just surviving. They were already searching for meaning, for pleasure, for a break from the relentless demands of prehistoric life. In a strange way, every bottle of wine opened at a celebration today, every ritual involving altered states across modern cultures, traces its roots back to that same impulse, an impulse that may be far older than civilization itself, maybe even older than our own species. And that raises an uncomfortable but fascinating question. If altering our consciousness is this deeply embedded in our evolutionary history, what does that tell us about who we really are? Here are 3 facts that might surprise you before we move on. Fact 1. Some species of birds, including cedar waxwings, have been documented eating fermented berries and displaying visibly impaired flight afterward, sometimes even fatally. Fact 2. The oldest confirmed beer-like residue found in pottery predates the invention of writing by thousands of years. Fact 3. Archaeologists believe some prehistoric burial sites contain traces of psychoactive plants placed deliberately alongside the dead, suggesting these substances may have played a role in how early humans understood death itself. 3 very different clues, all pointing toward the same conclusion. This part of our story is far older and far stranger than most of us ever learned in school. Of course, mushrooms, cacti, and fermented fruit are not the only substances that made their way into ancient human life. Across Southeast Asia and parts of the Pacific, chewing betel nut wrapped in leaves for its mild stimulant effect stretches back thousands of years, with stained teeth found on ancient skeletons serving as one of the clearest physical clues archaeologists have. In parts of the ancient Americas, tobacco was cultivated and used in ritual contexts long before Europeans ever encountered it. Often smoked or chewed during ceremonies meant to communicate with the spirit world. None of these substances were discovered through careful laboratory testing. They were discovered the same way almost everything else was discovered in prehistory, through trial, error, and generations of shared observation. Someone got sick, and the group remembered to avoid that plant. Someone else got better after chewing a certain root, and word spread quietly around the fire. Someone felt strange, disoriented, or oddly euphoric, and someone else nearby noticed and remembered exactly what had caused it. Over thousands of years, that slow accumulation of trial and error became something close to an oral pharmacy, passed down long before anyone had a word for chemistry. And figuring out exactly how researchers uncover this deep history is a story in itself. Modern archaeologists are not just guessing based on old artwork and folklore. They rely on advanced chemical techniques, including gas chromatography and mass spectroscopy, to detect microscopic residues left behind on ancient pottery, teeth, and even fossilized human waste. These residues can reveal traces of alkaloids and other compounds specific to certain plants, sometimes preserved for thousands of years in the right conditions. In some cases, scientists have even found preserved pollen grains inside ancient dental plaque, offering a startlingly precise window into what a specific person was eating, chewing, or inhaling before they died. It is a strange kind of forensic science, reconstructing altered states of consciousness that vanished tens of thousands of years ago, using nothing but chemical traces and fossilized fragments. And every year, new discoveries push this timeline even further back than scientists previously believed possible. Which means the story we just told you is not the final version. It is simply our best understanding, based on the evidence available right now. The deeper archaeologists dig, quite literally, the more it seems like the human relationship with altered consciousness goes back further than almost anyone expected. Maybe that tells us something important about ourselves. Maybe seeking out altered states, chasing a different way of experiencing the world, is not a modern invention or a modern flaw. Maybe it's simply, deeply, undeniably human. Maybe it always has been, quietly running beneath the surface of our species since long before we had a name for ourselves at all. But drugs and alcohol were not the only surprising thing our ancestors were doing in the shadows of prehistory. Because next, we're going to look at something even stranger. Something that suggests early humans were not only altering their minds, they may have been altering the world around them in ways scientists are only beginning to understand. And once you start looking at prehistory through this lens, it becomes almost impossible to unsee. Every fire circle, every shared drink, every strange plant chewed in the dark, tells the same quiet story about who we have always been as a species. If you're enjoying uncovering the hidden side of human history, hit subscribe, because we're only getting started.